Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the podcast review series. This is Just Fly Performance Podcast, episode 26, and it's with Steve Fudge. Steve Fudge is one of the head S&C or one of the head coaches for British Athletics. He does a lot of the 100 metre and the 200 metre sprinters. A lot of the top guys, Adam Jamili, but at the time he was doing this anyway. Adam Jamili, I know he doesn't train with them anymore, I don't think, but James Dasaolu and some of the ladies as well. He didn't mention any names. Episode 26. So, interestingly, Steve Fudge wasn't an athlete or had no real experience in the sport. Obviously, when he's actually the track coach, he's a track coach and the S&C coach. So, it's quite interesting that you hear from a lot of people that obviously you have to have experience in the sport, and he's used his experience as a strength coach as a gateway into being a track coach. So that's quite interesting because it's something that I'm looking to get into for throwing anyway, and whether I can maybe just use my relevant experience as a S&C coach and a weightlifting coach. And he said obviously a lot of the skills are transferable, knowing when to use cues, for example, and so that's a little bit about the kind of philosophy of coaching. Is, do you need a relevant experience in the sport? The answer is, I think for some sports, maybe not. I think for weightlifting and powerlifting, I do think you should. Another interesting thing they said was that the track and field athletes are used to having immediate feedback. They run their race, they look over and they see the time. So using that kind of thing, that can be quite useful in S&C as well. So we're talking about the tracking like bar velocity, for example, would be a good way. They do their lift, they look down on the thing and they see how fast they moved. That might be quite useful for them. It might fit their psychology quite well. Whereas maybe some people, like, I guess weightlifters might be a good example. Yes, they get immediate feedback from each lift, but they don't really get immediate feedback in terms of if they're progressing. So if they're doing like light volume work, for example, yes, they do get feedback from how it feels and the weight on the bar, but they maybe don't get feedback in terms of how it is bigger picture. So that was something they could use to kind of tap into the psychology of the track and field athletes. They talked about a lot about the cross extensor reflex, which I mentioned in a previous video. Obviously, the cross extensor reflex is basically a reflex in the body that when one leg flexes up, so like a high knee position, the other leg extends down, so basically sprinting. And it can kind of add some extra kind of juice to your muscle contractions, obviously being a reflex. Similar to the stretch shortening cycle, it works to aid speed and power and force generation on top of voluntary muscle contraction. So if you can train that reflex, the cross extensor reflex, you'll get significantly more gains in force production into the ground, for example. So that's why you see a lot of athletes do some really kind of weird looking S&C exercises. Maybe they do things like a hang clean into one leg on the box, like a high knee hang clean. And it makes a lot of sense that they're just trying to train that kind of snap and pop of the back leg extending and the front leg flexing up. Similarly with that, they like to train dorsiflexion a lot. Obviously, it's very useful for the front end of a race, for the start of the race. Being able to get the shins very far forward with stiffness, with control, is a big determinant of acceleration speed. So being able to, obviously, you will travel where the shins are traveling, where the shins are pointing. So in acceleration, you want to be moving forward. Shins will obviously fall forward as you kind of lean over, and that's good. When you get to max velocity, you actually don't want to be moving forward, you want to be moving up. Now obviously you don't think about that, but that's why when we land, the shins are a little bit more vertical, because you want to be in the air, because you're not braking in the air. Now that's maybe something I'll talk about another time, but people who aren't in the S&C world, who are watching this, might think that sounds ridiculous. I don't know, I did when I first heard it, but it's actually horizontal force is a lot more important in acceleration generally. and vertical force is a lot more important in max velocity. So they talked about a lot about single leg work, and it's very so this will go against what Mike Boyle said anyway, but Steve Fudge seems to think that it's very personal to each individual athlete. So they used James DeSalu as an example. They could get him squatting heavy up to like 6 weeks before a competition. That'd be really good for him. It would increase cross-sectional area, increase his force. But also the biggest thing is you get sprinters doing a heavy squat, and their psychology will just be through the roof, and that they will be confident. And I would argue that that's probably a bigger factor than any physiological benefit ever. So you could be like Asava Powell and be one of probably the best athlete ever, and have no confidence, and there you go, proof. So sometimes I kind of feel like maybe I wasted my time doing a whole SSC degree just to learn about stuff that you could just do psychology work for, but no, they go hand in hand, obviously. But they use a lot of single leg work. They didn't use it for Adam Jamili. They didn't use double leg work for Adam Jamili, for example. He had a lot of stiffness in his hips and his lumbar, and they wanted to do single leg work with him to take all the compression off the lumbar spine, which is fair enough, and obviously we know it evens out imbalances, and we know it's slightly more specific. It can train balance as well, but I think the biggest thing is it just takes compression off the lumbar and then the pelvis. And if you can't tolerate back squat, then fair enough, you don't need to do it. They talked a lot about, now this is probably the most interesting part, this is what I found this really interesting, is how now this is well known, but sprinting hormonally is by far the most anabolic exercise you can do by a long way. So hormonally, the body responds well to sprinters generally. Now, obviously, whether this is probably been tested in drug tested and kind of national level sprinters who probably aren't on drugs, but they always have higher testosterone levels. They always have, or free testosterone levels. They always have more muscle mass and lower body fat on average than any other sport. So they were fine with taking away squats, for example, 6 weeks before season, because they knew that when they started really running fast and the real high velocity training, that the anabolic effect of sprinting will preserve a lot of the muscle throughout the season. Now, a good example for that is actually when I went home in lockdown. For the first lockdown, I had no weights or anything at home. I did have some kind of weird 18 kilo block things that I used as kettlebells basically for single leg work. But from, I was at that point, I was back squatting at least 200 every week, and front squatting like at least 180 as well as that every week. And my biggest worry was that I had no weights and I would lose a lot of the body weight that I'd worked quite hard to get. So my main goal for going home was to keep my body weight, and I actually did that. For what was it, 4 months, just by doing single leg work and sprinting. I did sprint 3 times a week, to be fair, but I knew that I could go in and take 2 weeks to accustom to sprinting. So I did a lot of extensive work, a lot of lower intensity, higher volume stuff, just to build up the tolerance again. I knew I could do that without losing any real body weight in 2 weeks and any strength or muscle mass. But then after that 2 weeks, I went pretty much straight into 3 times a week sprinting. Now, I don't know if that's ideal for everyone. Obviously, I have a background in sprinting, but it's the most anabolic exercise. So I did that 3 times a week, hills, sprints, varying the intensities with the terrain I was on. So one of my days would be a natural speed day. That would be the Friday. The Monday would be a hill day, and then the Wednesday, I kind of did it like Texas method. I did the Monday as the volume day, the Wednesday is the lighter technique day, and then the Friday is the intensity day. So it's quite interesting. I took a squat program and made it into sprinting, but a lot of that muscle that I had from weightlifting was preserved, as well as getting way more powerful and flexible by doing all the other stuff like the plyometrics and the gymnastics stuff was good. So that's quite a pertinent example in that it's actually happened to me. So yeah, that was my biggest worry, was that I'd lose weight, and I didn't lose any weight. And I took before and after pictures, and if anything, I got leaner. So I don't know. I was quite. It was a lot of panic that didn't really warrant panicking. So, but yeah, moving on. Male versus female 100 meters. So he coaches males and females. It's a different sport, really. He said because the females are running about over a second slower, because of the forces they cannot put into the ground, because of some of the biological advantages that males have, it takes women a lot less time to recover. So for men, it's more about a recovery. It's more about being neurally ready on the day, whereas he was saying that for the females, it's more about physical condition. It's more about power to weight ratio and general kind of fitness, which makes a lot of sense, really. If you got, especially because of the overall force is going to be a lot lower that they put into the ground. I think because the men's forces are so much higher, it can really dictate the whole. That can basically dictate the whole race, just who can put the most force into the ground, and that we know that's true. With obviously at some point, efficiency comes into play and technique comes into play. But if you think about I forgot. I believe it was China, and they had it was a research paper done in China, and they had. I think it might have been a sumo wrestler. It was either a sumo wrestler or a super heavyweight weightlifter. It was a big boy versus their top 100-meter hurdler at the time, 110-meter hurdler at the time, who was actually, I know people say, oh, China aren't very fast. Obviously they are. That's a lie. The top 100-meter hurdler at the time was what was his name? The guy who lost to Dayron Robles because he got cheated out of it. I forgot his name. I don't know. He was unbelievable. Basically, the Olympic medalist, Olympic gold medalist. I think he was the world record holder at some point. Let me Google him now. But basically, they had a 100-meter race, just a flat 100-meter race, and the big boy, the weightlifter or sumo wrestler, I think it was a weightlifter, to be fair, a heavyweight weightlifter, was actually winning at 40 meters, and then obviously he was way heavy, and Lu Zhang overcame him with his efficiency and his power. So it does seem like for a lot of it was just purely based on force. The heavy boy could produce a lot more force, even relative to his disgustingly larger body weight compared to Lu Zhang. And Lu Zhang was very slight, and he was a tall guy, but he was very, very lean, obviously. So that was quite interesting as well. That's a paper I always go back to. But for about I think it was up to 40 meters, the big boy was winning. But then he got absolutely destroyed, obviously. But yeah, a final thing they mentioned was people who are late risers. They referenced Adam Jamili, someone who goes to bed late but wakes up a lot later as well. Just train them later. Don't need to do early morning stuff, and that's fair enough. That makes a lot of sense. Intuitively, that makes a lot of sense. But bit of a moral thing is that, not moral, but a bit of a like time and cost implication is that obviously they're pro athletes and they can train whenever they want, whereas we can't necessarily. So like even I can't. Even I have quite a job that kind of allows me to train at a lot more freer times. I still can't train whenever I want. So there you go. That's episode 26, Just Fly Performance Podcast, and that is with Joel Smith and Steve Fudge. A good podcast, a good one.